Welcome to Mini Modernz. My name's Simone and thank you for joining me on my tiny corner on the miniature interweb where we're here to think big, build small. So let's get into it. Today is part 2 of our Christmas Eve diorama / roombox. We're going to be working on the interior design where we're going to be building everything from scratch and putting this all together and watching it get ruined by Santa Claus. Yeah, you heard me correct, guys. So if you want to see this, please stay tuned. It's a bit of a long one, guys, so you might want to get some tea, some snacks, a notepad, pen, whatever you're going to need. I hope you guys enjoy part 2 and you get some value out of it. If you do, make sure you leave a comment for me down below. Let's get into it. So we're going to be referring back to our Dollhouse notebook where we previously did the sketch to work out how we're going to do this interior decor. I know that I want a chair, a wreath, a Christmas tree, Santa, a coffee table, and our main feature, which was the prompt, which is a rug. So we're going to put all this together today. This book is available on Amazon. I will leave a link in the description for this. I start by giving the room a nice light little dusting with a paintbrush to clean up any little mess that was left behind before. Oh my god, they get so dirty. And to finish the cleaning, I add some white paint to a cotton ball and just dab it on the wall to keep the textures that we started in part 1. And this is just to clean up and brighten up the wall but still keep the textures. So I go around filling all of the gaps and just making this wall really nice, bright and white. My first point of call for the home decor is this modern armchair. I've got a printable here which is available for my tier 2 Patreons. It's a new Patreon, but I've set it up for anyone who wants to support and work along as well. So there is a copy of this available for tier 2. So what we do as making anything is cut out the template onto, I'm using balsa wood. It's really nice and soft and easy to use. It's actually my first time using it and I'm so surprised how good it is. So cut the templates out so you've got all the pieces that you need to make the chair. So you've got the back seat, the cushion, the arm, all the pieces. I also cut the template out on some cardboard as well. So I've got 2 layers. So we've got the balsa wood, the cardboard, and this is so when I'm sticking the fabric on, it's actually going to be sticking onto the cardboard and not onto the wood itself because we don't want any seepage. And I'm just going to label all the pieces so I don't get them confused. So I'm going to just use simple hot glue just to stick this together and then just trim off any excess that I don't need. So all of these pieces here should all be doubled up with some cardboard. The 2 arm pieces will be stuck together like this, and the seat and back seat, or the base and the back seat, are going to now be covered with the fabric. So I'm just going to use some really nice sturdy linen fabric. You can use whatever kind of fabric you want because it's your armchair, your design. But for me, I really wanted this color. I felt that it would go with the modern vibe that I was going for in this modern rustic room with a hint of wabi-sabi. I'll get into that a little bit more later. I'm just going to cut the fabric so that I've got enough of it to cover the template for the base, and I'm going to make sure that this is really nicely stuck down and trying not to leave any glue on the actual fabric that will be seen. Technically this won't be seen because this is going to be the base of the chair, but I want any glue to actually go onto the cardboard and not onto the wool or the fabric that will be shown. So I'm just going to fold this over, and then again, just using my rotary tool, I'm going to cut off some of the sides to trim it down so we don't have too much unnecessary bulking when we're going to fold this fabric over. So I cut them down and make sure that I'm happy with how it looks on the edges. Bearing in mind this is my first ever armchair, I'm really happy with how clean it looks at the end, because I know sometimes it can look a bit bulky and funny. But the wood glue as well, I really like using this on the fabric. I do have fabric glue. You can use that or you can sew this however you prefer. You might be a professional like this. But get it nice and clean, and then we're going to do the same again on the back seat. To clean up the sides that I do use the glue on, I just use some spare fabric just to cover that over. This won't actually be seen, but for my own personal OCD, if you like, I just wanted to clean up any edges that I didn't feel looked really presentable, but it will all be stuck together. I then add some glue to the side of the base so we can add the back seat to it, and then I'm going to use wood glue again and just let that set. I prep my seat and back cushions with some foam that I've had before, so using the template I just cut around the pieces that I need. I actually use 2 different thicknesses for my seat and back cushion. I use a thinner one for the back cushion and a thicker one for the main seat. While that's setting, we're going to work on the arms of the chairs in the same way that we did the base and the back of the chair, making sure the fabric is actually stuck to the cardboard. Now we should have 2 of those pieces. Now with the wrong size facing each other, those are the parts that we are going to glue together, because we don't want any of that messed up fabric being what we see. So that's why I've got these 2 together, so that we can just glue them, and then we're going to shape and trim this a little bit later, so we have something looking like this. When they're dry, we can connect them to the base and the back of the chair, just adding a little bit of glue along the sides of the armchair, just 2 sides, the short and long side that is going to be stuck to the base and the back of the chair. So we just stick those on, get rid of any excess glue, and let those set and dry. And while they're drying, we go back to the cushions and just add the fabric. Like I said, I've got 2 thicknesses, so this is the actual seat, and this one I've used about 3/4 of an inch thick. So whatever material you're using, this is what I chose and the thickness that I chose, and it works out well. So we're just going to cover these slightly different than we did the base and the back of the chairs, just for the neatness of the cushion and how I wanted it to look at the front. So I trimmed it off slightly different, so there is no fabric on the inner side of the cushion where we'll be folding those over. I just used some nice little cutting tool here. It's really cool, really handy, like shear cutters, and then folded them into kind of like a triangle shape, and then just folded them over and kept on testing to make sure that I was happy with how it would look on the seam lines at the edges. And there we have it. Before I stuck the cushions down, I wanted to add a little bit of trim to the front of it just to keep everything flush and neat. So I just add my wood glue again, found a nice little bit of slight ridged trim just to stick around the edge, just to keep everything nice and uniform, and also to cover up any pieces that I thought didn't look in sync. So I just stick that down and then let that set. Now I can add glue to the base and add my cushions. Here's cushion number 1, the base. It fits absolutely perfectly. I am thrilled. Yay! And there's just enough gap at the back that we can add our cushion as well, that we upholstered exactly the same way that we did the other cushion. Now that we can just slip that in. Result! Don't you just feel happy when a mission comes together? Because this was a mission. And if you are following along and you need like a smaller tutorial, please just let me know it in the comments, and I can make another video with this slowed down step by step. So now, using the template that we've got some little strips on there that we're going to use as the trimming just to clean this up. So using exactly the same fabric, or if you want to get creative, use a different color fabric. Trim this however you like, but cut a piece. I use some cardstock paper to the same size as the template, and also use some double-sided tape to stick onto the fabric, which we are then gonna put the cardstock paper on, and that is what we're going to use as our trimming. So we just peel off the double-sided tape, and I also added a little bit of extra wood glue once I've stuck my cardstock paper on there, because I want all of this to be seamless but really nice and secure. Because once this glue is added, we're going to fold over all of the edges, so we've got a nice streamlined piece of trimming. Your trimming should look like this once we finish, just a nice clean strip. Cut off any excess pieces of string and things that we don't need, because we want this to look really clean when we add this to the armchair. So starting from the bottom of the armchair, I'm just going to measure up and make sure this is how I want it. And then again, I'm just using wood glue, but you can use fabric if you want. Just follow the line all the way around and then stick that down, cutting off any excess that you don't need. I do exactly the same procedure on the other side of the chair and also at the back seat of the chair, using the smaller strip again just to keep this all clean and looking good. So now we can add some feet and some cushions, and how I'm going to do that is just have a same matching fabric, but you can use completely different cushions. A little bit later on I do throw on an extra cushion on there because I'm extra, but measure up the size of the cushion that you want to fit. For me, I just folded up a piece of fabric that was the same as what I was using already and measure that to the size of the width of the chair. So just keep on folding the fabric so that it fits into the chair. I'll give you the measurements a little bit later so you can see the size that I used. So you see that's about the perfect size. So when I fold this over in half now, that will be the actual size that I want for this. So all I'm going to do is clean up the edges with my infamous wood glue again. If you want, you can do this whichever way that you prefer, but for me this was just a bit quicker, and I don't mind waiting for the dry time. It's okay with me. So I do this on both sides to make sure that it's nice and clean on the edges. When I'm happy with the edges, I'm going to fold this over again and just glue 2 sides together and leave 1 opening for my filler. Just doing a double test to make sure that it's all going to fit perfectly, and I'm really happy with that. And the size of the cushion before I fold it is 2 3/4 inches or 69 millimeters, depending how you want it, and that is before we fold it in half. As you can see, we're just going to glue along both sides here, just the length of this, and at the bottom just as long as we leave an opening to put our filler in. I just fold and seal these together and then just let that set. I use some cushioning cotton as my filler to put inside these little mini cushions here. I also use some tweezers to open it up and shove that in there. So before I seal the final side, I make sure I get that nice little dip in the cushion there. Use a karate chop action to put it in. That's so silly sometimes, you know. But there we have. Now it's time for the legs. Now for the legs, I'm using wooden dowels. 10mm by 10mm is the size, and I wanted this to kind of have like a rustic look, so I'm using 2 of them to stack on top of each other and have jaggedy edges, because I feel like it gives it more of a texture and more of a carved wood feel. So I'm going to paint these with my burnt umber, and I've got some green on my gloves already, and I kind of smudged that in. I feel it gave it a bit more of a like an earthy tone. I was really happy with that. So these are going to be our legs. We're going to stick these together and then we're going to add them to the couch once they've dried. And there we have our lovely armchair. Yay! Now I start the tedious process of ripping up some tiny pieces of sponge to make some chunky flocking. I blend the sponge so it's nice and fluffy and airy. Then I add a combination of paints for the colour I need. Then I let that dry until I've got this nice earthy green. Then I add my flock. I get some pipe cleaner. Now it's time to make our Christmas wreath. I get the pipe cleaner and wrap it around itself to form a nice little circle. Voila! When that's done, I add it to a mixture of PVA and water and just let that get really covered in. Then we're going to dump it into a bunch of this flocking and let it set. So really get this wreath covered up and let it set and let it dry. I let it actually dry for a day or 2 because I really wanted it to be really submerged in there. When it's dry, we can just get rid of any excess flocking that we don't need. So I just like poke a little hole in the middle and just squeeze it all around just to make sure it's all unified. Any pieces that didn't take quite the shape that I wanted, I just added some hot glue to hold it down. And here's the final result. It's time to add some decorations. I've got some really cool little acorns. I cannot remember where I got them from. If I find it, I will put a link in the description. I am not really a wreath type of person. I don't normally decorate these things, but I really had a good time just kind of playing around with it. I just added some acorns on there, some bows, trinkets, and I really liked how it ended up turning out in the end. So much so that I made a few more different sizes because I didn't know what style I'd actually eventually want. This one I ended up just using a kind of silver vibe with some beads and some of my nail decorations. I added some glue on there as well with some nice little glittery sprinkles. It was really cute, but I still don't know which one I'm going to use to the very end. We'll have to see, guys. Sprinkle, sprinkle, sprinkle. And here are my final results. So cute. And now some more flocking, but this time I use sawdust with 2 different gradients, if you like. One really fine and one a little bit more thicker like this. So we got one for the Christmas tree and one that I'm going to use for a boxwood spiral tree. So I'm going to use some hemp rope to make the Christmas tree. Why am I doing this? I don't know, guys. I like to push myself. On this channel I've mentioned that I do like to try and make things from scratch and just learn as I go, so that's what I'm doing. So I take some hemp rope and some wire. Again, I will leave a link in the description to everything that I use. I'm not sure the gauge that I'm supposed to have on the wire, so I actually took 2 pieces and tied them together to make a thick enough piece so that my method of madness would work. I could have just bought a fake tree. I actually did buy a fake tree, but I really didn't like what it was giving, you know? So yeah, I twist up 2 of these and I got myself really nice and dirty, pulling the hemp apart, and it comes apart really nicely. It's a great texture for a tree. And then I painted these for obviously the tree leaves. I wanted to kind of go for a fir tree or a pinecone tree. you can tell me afterwards what you think I made. So once the paint had dried and set, I used my 2 pieces of wire and inserted the hemp rope in between the wires and kind of twisted those at the end so they were nice and solidified in there. I saw a video on how to kind of twist wire, so I've used my drill. I got my fiance to hold the other side of the drill for me whilst I kind of clamped this down. It took a few attempts, not gonna lie. The thing was flying everywhere, but then we got the grip, we got the hang of it, and then we started spinning and spinning until we had something that looked a little bit like this. So I'm gonna trim down the wire that we don't need and trim down this tree to look like a tree. Yeah, I said that. I covered my tree in a PVA and water glue mix, and then I added some flocking, and this was really nice. It turned out really cool. It was a process, it was trial and error. I mean, this project took me a long time because I was really just trying to think, but I really liked how it turned out at the end. I think the more refined pieces of sawdust worked really well. I also tested making a smaller tree with the unrefined sawdust, and that gave a really nice bush. So at least I know how to make trees now, right? So now to make the stump, I use some grey craft board and then score the lines to form it into a circle, then stick that together, and then I add some tissue and my PVA and water mixture to make the texture of the actual tree. I did this in my first diorama to make a tree as well, so it's the same procedure that I did before. Then I cut that down and I painted it with some white gesso, and then later on I do paint it to look like a tree stump. If you remember part 1, I made a lot of vases and clay, just decor. So now I'm going to use one of those to make the Boxwood spiral tree. So I insert a bamboo stick into the vase. I also use some styrene foam to kind of hold the stick once it's ready to dry. So what I do is add some hot glue to the bamboo stick, because this is what we're going to stick our cotton wool onto as the base. So you just wrap some cotton wool into a spiral motion into the length that you want it and the spiral you want, and then we're going to add some PVA and water mixture to kind of hold the flock that we've just made. So now we're going to put this into the flocking, give it a good flocking, and then just leave that to set for a little while. And while that dries, I'm now going to paint the rest of the things that we made with the homemade clay that we made in part 1. Remember, I will leave a link in the description to all of the materials that I used to craft everything in this project. So I'm going to hit it up with a layer of gesso and everything, because I want it to have a strong white undertone before we start painting. So I did make the chandelier, the antler chandelier with the tree root kind of look, and now that's all painted, I can start adding some of the textures. As I wanted this to kind of represent wood, I'm just going to use my burnt umber brown, rub that on there and wipe it off, and just try and create some different tones with this. I'm going to do the same with the antlers and the chandelier, because I want those kind of all to look a little bit the same, but they're going to have slight variations. I now add some yellow paint because I want to try and bring in some of the bone tones that you'll normally get from antlers. It looks a bit bright at the moment, but I do dull it down and wipe it off and kind of mix it in a bit. I want this kind of chandelier to represent real aged authentic antlers that have been aged over time, and obviously the bowl that it is in isn't made of bone, but it's been decorated to kind of match the antlers. So the people who lived here do have quite expensive and unique tape, and they kind of like the style, as I mentioned earlier, wabi sabi, where they embrace the beauty of imperfections of natural materials and things you found around. So a lot of the decor, even though we were with a rustic modern vibe, they do like the natural elements of possibly where they live, and they find things and bring it together or get it handcrafted by a special somebody. Me! I couldn't help it, I'm sorry guys. But now I go ahead and give everything a dry brush with my white paint, just to bring in some of the pops of underage tone and the bone structure. As I said, because this is aged, I don't want it to look like the fresh bones that you probably would get. It's really been sat in darkness for a while, I suppose. But yeah, there is my handmade chandelier, and it looks perfect on the ceiling. It's what I envisioned, and I'm really happy. And this was all made from homemade clay, so I'm really chuffed. And also it's time to do the painting, where we use the balsa wood, some tissue, and some leftover paste that we used to put on the walls as well. Again, I'm just kind of going with a kind of modern style art, lightly brushing over the top of these kind of hilly textures. And then I'm just going to go in with some black paint just to create a modern design that they would have brought to their beautiful home with them. So we're going to go with black, and then I hit it up with a little bit of brown paint in the corner just to add a little bit more bounce to it, I suppose. And there we have our modern wall art. I paint the rest of the pieces with some more natural earthy tones to go with the vibe that we're working with in this house. The bowl that I made, I've turned that into a nice little modern planter where I just add some of the flocking that we made earlier, a few stones, just to give us a nice modern decorative piece. Now it's time to paint our cheeky Santa. I give him an underlaying of red paint and black and the usual Santa colours, but I will be going over this with some fabric. But I just wanted to line out where I'd be using my fabrics, and I did want to make sure that his butt was left out. It's very important that his butt is left out. I play around with the brown and white paint until I get the right colour that I want from his bum, and then I just paint that over so we know where that is when we come to dressing him later on. And I get in there with some black and brown to define the crack of his butt so we can actually definitely see that it's a butt. I'll leave that to dry because our tree is now ready and we can paint the trunk. I'm just going to use a few different textures of brown to get the trunk. As I said, I still want this to look really nice and modern, so I'm going to hit this with a few layers of brown, and then I'm going to go in and paint the vase. I wanted the vase to represent the rustic stoneware type of vase with a lot of different stone undertones with some aging on it to represent that this has been around for a little while. It's sentimental to the family. They use it for everything, so I wanted this to kind of represent that. So I use a lot of greys and a lot of browns, but really dabbing them on. So I don't paint this, I just dab all the colors on because it actually adds a pop of texture to it as well. And I think once it dries and sets, it really gives it that realistic look. I dab off any excess paint because I don't want it to be too heavy with wetness and texture. I want it to dry kind of rough. I'm really happy with how it's turned out, and here's a look at the greenery that we've made so far with homemade flocking. Now it's time to finish the antlers. It's time to mount them onto the little display unit that I'm going to make. So I just used some balsa wood and cut it into like a rough, uneven kind of plaque that I wanted this to go on. Then I'm going to just use a couple of combinations of brown paint. I did initially try using wood glue to stick the antlers on, but I'm impatient and I wasn't sure how long I'd have to wait. So I've got some super glue with an activator. These things are now my best friends, guys. I've never been a super glue person, but now that I know about it and the perks of using super glue, oh yeah, super glue. And the activator, you just spray that on and you can let go and it's like magic. As I said, as a beginner, I am always learning new things, and the super glue, chef's kiss. So I go over and paint some of the mistakes that I made using the wood glue that you could see and just cleaned it up. Now to add some fabric to our Santa, I just use felt fabric, but you can use whatever you want if you try this at home for yourself. I've already cut it into kind of the shape that I need it to be, and then just use some wood glue mixed with hot glue to stick it down. I just wrap the fabric around the top part for his jacket, so it looks a little something like this, just nice and snugly fit. And then we do the same for his pants or trousers. I also added some white felt to the trimmings of his jacket and his arms and legs, and this is what he looks like so far. Poor Santa. I mean, is it really poor Santa? No, it's not. But we'll explain all of that in a little while. But now I'm going to just add a little bit of definition to his belt. So I just use some yarn to wrap around the belt. I just put it in 3 little strips and then stick that on. And then I also go over it with some paint and Mod Podge to add a little bit of gloss to the belt so it gives it a bit more texture. Now to complete our little Santa look, I'm using some cotton wool or cotton balls if you like to make his hair. We're not going to get to see his luscious beard, but we can see his hair at the back. So what I wanted to do is put some hair that is flowing down on the back of his neck, and I'm going to just stick that on so we can see that when he is running away, caught red-handed running away, but we're going to get to see his hair. So I just wanted to shape that up a little bit and then place that on. Santa is looking great, and now for a test fit. Does all of this extra. Yay, he fits perfectly. There is our runaway Santa. We're gonna find out why in a minute. Get your ass back here. I wanted to add a little bit of detail to the fireplace, so I actually picked up some sticks from my garden and chopped them up into little pieces. Even though we won't really be seeing the fireplace, I know it's there, and if I know it's there, I have to add the detail. It's just something that I've kind of picked up along my way of doing miniatures. Realism is definitely something that I want to strive towards, so I just paint it with some brown and black and stick it together with some hot glue. I also dry brush it with some white paint just to add that kind of ashy tone to the sticks. Then I add a dab of orange and yellow paint mixed together just to represent where the fire has gone out a bit, and then I stick that down. I also add a little soot and coal later on. I made this basket to hold the chopped firewood using wicker, dew and some fabric. Now I'm going to make my coffee table. I'm going to use some grey craft board that is scored to form the circle, and continuing with the sticks that I got from my garden, this is what's going to form the actual decoration, the base of this table. I want to give it a nice wabi-sabi style with that really natural organic look. But first I'm going to start using some glue and water mixture and some tissue to give the definition of the tree bark. Even though this won't necessarily be seen, because the sticks are going to be going around it, I wanted it to have that organic feel underneath the sticks. So I go ahead and put this mixture all the way around it. I stuff the bottom of my trunk with this as well, just so I get that nice sturdiness when this all sets and dries. I use a toilet roll for the base, so I just cut this up and stick it on with some hot glue and some PVA glue. Now that it's dry, I'm going to paint this and try and make it represent a tree the best I can. Even though the majority of the edges will be covered in the sticks, I still wanted to make sure if you see through any gaps, it's still going to have that tree-like texture. So I'd use a couple of combinations of brown to paint around the edges, and then I do some lighter tones for the rim, and then I get even lighter still to paint the middle to represent some of that inner tone of the tree. So I'm just mixing some colors together, dabbing it on, making sure I get a lot of texture, because this part will actually be seen. Now I can add the real sticks around my table. So just using my miter tool, I chop the sticks for measurements. So now that I've got them all chopped to size, I can just stick them all on. And I'm going to use my trusty wood glue to do the job, and I'm going to just stick these all around. This is how it's looking so far, and I'm super happy with it. I'm just going to let it set and dry, and then I've got a cut around the base so that we can see this as a real table. I'm really happy with this. It's something very different, and I think the occupants of this house would really go for something like this. Now it's time to get on with our actual prompt, which was making the rug. So you can see here I've made this rug. It was a festive Christmas style rug that I made, and this one is currently in my Etsy store if it's still there. I was going to make another one, and then I had the idea for this video and I kind of pulled it apart what I was working on. So I'm going to, instead of wasting the fabric, I was like, I'm going to use this fabric and make my prompt for this video. I've made a few bespoke rugs. I've got some Modernz, some casual, some bath rugs, and I'm really thrilled with this. So I'm going to show you the technique today that I use to make these rugs. A few of them will be in my Etsy store, but because I've made only one of each, they might still be there, they might not. I've only recently put them in my store, but I will be putting more in, and the colors can be customized and changed to preference if anyone does want any of these. So I've got larger size, medium, and I'm currently working on a smaller bath rug. And here are the 3 different sizes, but today we are going to be working on the middle size, which is the medium, for our diorama. So this technique is called punch needling. You need some yarn or embroidery thread, a loop. This is kind of what the same that you would use for embroidery, but a lot bigger. And this punch needle pen is what I call it. This pen is basically where we thread the yarn through. You can see it's got different notches over here to show you the thickness of your yarn once you punch it through the fabric. So you can have really, really long like this, or medium or small. I like to keep it on the first notch for what I'm doing. The fabric that I'm using is called Monk's cloth, M-O-N-K-S, and it's really strong, sturdy fabric. To thread our yarn through the needle, we've got this little yarn threader is what I call it. I'm not sure of the other name, but it just basically, what I tend to do, people may have different ways, but I put the threader through this big hole here. Let me just squeeze that together. So you put it through the big hole, and then I slide it through the tube until it comes out the other end. So you just keep on pushing until you've got it out of the other end, like this. Then we get our yarn or embroidery thread, whatever it is that you're using. And then we just hook that over this little loop here. And once that's on, there's a tag at the end, and you just pull that tag and it should pop out through the other little hole. And there we have it. Other people do it different ways, but I personally prefer it this way. Once we are threaded, we can start punching. Why it's called punch needle, I guess, is because the motion you use to do this, it's kind of like you're stabbing at the material. So it's threaded through, and you want to have a lot of slack on your yarn, so a lot of movement, so make sure it's all loose and ready to go. As I said, you can see this pattern on here because generally I would draw the pattern onto the fabric and then I would punch through, and the design comes out on the reverse, but I'll show you what I mean as we go along. But before we do get started punching, you want to make sure that your fabric is in the loop really nice and taut so that you could tap it and it's almost like a drum. Now to punch, you want to leave about 1/2 inch of the yarn on your little needle, and we're just going to punch through the fabric and then slowly lift it up, not letting the needle come off the fabric. So you kind of punch in and then you slide out, just punch in and slide out at a really, especially for the beginning couple of rows, you really want to take your time because it's very easy to lose the loops. So I'm punching in and the loops form on the opposite side. So I'm trying to show you how it looks. This is the right side. I'm punching on the wrong side. I will do a more in-depth tutorial of this if anybody is interested. So let me know in the comments if you would like to learn how to do punch needle for yourself. I was thinking of setting up some little classes and maybe getting some kits out for yourself if you wanted to do it. I'm going to show you here, like if you pull too much, you can lose your loop, but it's very easy to unravel if you just pull this out. Let's try again. So you just pull the thread and then just pull it until the needle is pretty much touching the cloth, and then you can punch back in. The Monk's cloth is very forgiving. You can kind of put it back into shape if you like. So once you've used it, if you made a mistake, you can kind of reform and go back in. So you punch in and out, but just take your time. So I'm going to speed this up a little bit and show you what happens once we get to the end and how it looks. So once you get to the end of the row, you could go all the way around just following the square, or you could just go and change to the next row, making sure that your needle is facing upwards so you can kind of see the hole. And you can just keep doing the same all the way along until you've got some nice loops forming, and then you've got your completed work. Once you get to the end, you hold underneath where your last loop is. So here's your last loop. You just put your finger over it. You can see how cool this looks. You just hold it and then you're just gonna pull out. So really gently, we're holding your loop and then you just pull it out and then pinch, and then just use some nice little clipper shears to cut that off. This will not unravel as well. It's really very sturdy, but I do like to use some extras when I make mine. Generally, I'll use either an adhesive to put on the back or another piece of fabric to put on the back, just to be on the safe side. But this will be getting stuck into a diorama, so I don't need to do that. Depending on the finishes that you want for your rug, this is the tedious part. Some people like to keep the loops on because that's their style, but because I want mine to really look like a carpet or a rug, I gotta cut every single one of these loops. Yeah, this part is a nightmare. I think the more of these I do, I may invest in some shears, because I know if you're making like real life-size rugs, you would use some shears. But before I continue cutting all of these, Santa's got a little mess to make. Yep, this is the part. I am going to be putting muddy footprints on our Santa, and he is going to be ruining all of my lovely hard work. I'm sorry to ruin this for you Santa lovers, but our Santa likes to dabble in a little bit of the old drinker-rooney. Yeah, every time he stops by a house, he has the cookies, he feeds his ears, the carrots, and then he goes for the booze if there's any hanging around. And unfortunately for us, there is booze hanging around. Booze is alcohol for you non-Brits out there. So he gets caught in the act. He's got muddy feet. He's been walking up and down on a lovely carpet. He knows he shouldn't be doing stuff like this, but he's too far gone at this point. It's Christmas Eve. He should have already left the house, but the sun is starting to rise. The occupants of the house are starting to get up, and he starts panicking, flapping, running around. He's drunk. He's eating the cookies. He spills his wine. He doesn't even think to clean it up or anything. He's so out of the zone, guys. He's got his belt undone and his butt hanging out. He really is feeling really nice and comfortable in this modern rustic home. He's reading up about the tiny living. He's like, oh, maybe I could do this. But then he hears people rummaging around upstairs, and he flips out, knocks the wine, crumbs everywhere, and tries to bolt to the fireplace, but it's too late. He literally gets caught with his pants down trying to escape. The occupants of the house take a picture and will never forget that Christmas Eve. So now, with my rug partially ruined because there is still more to go, I am going to continue chopping up and cutting up my loops and shearing this down. Yay! So with the loops cut and it's sheared down to the kind of length that I want, I still want it to have that nice little fluffy vibe, but this is what I want. I've cut it out and left about an inch all around the edges so that we can now fold this over and get this all seamed together. I cut all the corners to make sure that it's a lot easier for me to fold, and when we do fold this, we want to make as least amount of bulking as possible. So I'm going to fold it, I see where I want it to connect, and then I'll be cutting off any excess that we don't need. You could sew this, use fabric glue or use wood glue, whatever you choose to sew it. And then what I like to do is steam press this. So you can either use a wet cloth or you can use steam from your iron, but this is looking really good right now. It's got that nice little fluffy look we're going for. So I'm just going to use something like the muslin type of material and use the steam from my iron just to press this. It helps seal the fabric together, and it helps get that nice flat kind of look that you would normally get on a carpet without taking away the fluff. So now, after we've steamed it, it's got like a nice little glossy look on the other side, and we can just fluff this up with our fingers now, just so it's not so flat. But because I want this to be worn and used and trampled on somewhat by you know who, I'm going to leave some of the areas flat. But you can, generally, I would like to have this like fluffed out. So certain areas I'll leave fluffed out and other areas I'll leave flat. Now let's make some of the products that's going to destroy our rug. It's going to be some wine bottles. I'm using some cardstock paper to make my wine bottles and some plates. I'll have a printable for these in my Etsy store. So we've got some plates, some labels for the bottles, and the strips to make the bottles itself. So what I simply do is cut the strips. You can't really see here, but there are slight variations in tone. One of them slightly green and one of them slightly deep purple. So I just use a cocktail stick or a toothpick to wrap my strips around. So I put a little bit of glue on the end and then try and make it connect just to see where I want it to connect to the paper. So I use the glue to get the initial grip to start with, and then I just keep on wrapping this around until the whole thing is wrapped around the cocktail stick. Just want to show you the measurements on this as well. So without the top, it's about 3/4 of an inch, but I want it to be an inch big, an inch long once it's actually done. So here is the tube, and it's been stuck together with some glue. Now you just take something just to poke the middle part up a little bit, and then we have that measuring to an inch. I choose to file this down to kind of smooth this up a little bit, and then I add some PVA glue to kind of stick this together, just putting a little bit of my finger, and just kind of, it helps to mold the shape I found. Hey, what do I know, eh? Now I'm going to make the bottle top, so I'm going to use another strip of paper, and you can use whatever you like because we're going to paint this anyway. So you want it to measure about 1/2 inch to 2.5 inches. This should give you a reasonable size bottle top. We fold this over a cocktail stick the same way that we did the bottle. Then we take it off the stick and then add it to our bottle. So it will look a little something like this. Yay! Our own wine bottle from paper. It's possible. I do add some hot glue to the bottom to kind of seal it, and then I'm going to paint that as well a little bit later on. I just add some gloss and some black paint onto this just to define it a little bit more, and also some paint to kind of cover up any of the paper pieces that you might be able to see. To paint the bottle lid, I add some red and black paint together to kind of give that like deep tone, and I also use this to paint the bottom where we added the hot glue. So here just painting the top. Later on I do add a tiny little bit of the cocktail stick to the top part here to represent the cork. I add some nail varnish for the gloss, and then I add the label. Then I make a whole bunch more that we can add to the shelves later on. They still need some hot glue for the bases and the corks, but you get the picture. Now to make some modern wine glasses. I'm going to use a bit of this old skipping rope that actually was broken. I'm going to cut it up. It's kind of like a rubbery texture. I'm just going to cut it up into the sizes that I would like my tubular glasses to be. I've got these little tiny pieces that I've got in like a jewelry accessory thing, some cocktail sticks. Pretty much we're just gonna stick these all together. I wanted to find a way to make as many things as possible without using any resin, without using anything apart from what I kind of have around the house. So I just put the little rings on top of the cocktail stick. I put 2 of them on to make the base of the cup a lot thicker. And you can see I just paint it black and we have a cup. Now it's time to make the plate that Santa's going to have his little snacks on. I cut out my modern plate design and then add it to my circle stencil to embevel it a little bit. I use my nail dotting tool to help with that. So it's got a slight dip in the plate. It's really handy. I'm actually using cardstock paper, but I do decide to double it up with one of my other plate patterns. This isn't really necessary. I embevel it as well, and then I stick these together. I use a black marker pen to go around the edges and neaten it up a bit. Then I add some Mod Podge gloss just to give it a nice little finish and make it a little bit more sturdy. My daughter made this awesome carrot and asked if I could leave it for Santa. Of course. Now I decide to make the wall light, which is just going to be a simple piece of balsa wood shaped how I would like to put up against the wall. Nothing too fancy, but very modern and chic. And I'm going to just paint this black on both of them. To make my biscuits or cookies for Santa, I just use a nice little sticky strip that I had and then just paint it, then add it to my plate with the wonderful little carrot that I've got. Some of the biscuits I leave behind and shred them up to represent the crumbs that our Santa is going to leave behind, the cheeky man. I add a few dots onto the cookie to represent either chocolate chips or little holes, depending on what kind of biscuits you reckon these are. I am not a food maker yet, but I will get there. But I don't think Santa will mind at all. There you have it. Not too shabby. My heart hurts as I ruined my rug. Why, Santa? Why? So as you can see, I've added the cup to the stain of wine, and now I'm adding the crumbs that we've just made. I'm just going to get this really messy and wonderful. The pain, guys. The pain. Santa, why don't you love me? Now with my rug well and truly destroyed, I am satisfied. I make a few presents to go under the tree and also get some books prepped for our shelves. I have these as printables available in my Etsy store as well, some modern home living, some bird books, and I also decided to create some thriller books. So I feel like the occupants of this house, when they're sat lazy by the fire, they might want to cozy up and read a little murder mystery. I'm a bit of a Martina Cole fan myself, so I made a few Martina Cole selections and a few other little murder mystery books. So I'm going to use the technique of sticking the covers to some foam board and folding it over, but there are plenty of other ways of doing your book covers. Now for some more tiny details, because I just can't help myself. I wanted some candles to put on the fireplace. So using my circle stencil, I cut out 2 circles per candle, and then I'm going to stick these together and embevel them the same way that we did the plates earlier. I also cut out a super thin strip which will represent the handle. I'll be using a toothpick for the candle itself and then a little piece of wire for the actual wick. Using my tweezers, I stick my wire to my toothpick and then add a little bit of hot glue onto the toothpick to represent the wax dripping down. I bend that tiny strip of paper using my dotting tool to make the handle. I then stick the handle on the base and the top of my candle holder. So it looks a little something like this. I paint it with my lamp black, then paint my candle with a really light coffee type colour. I use a metallic yellow paint for the candle flame and then connect this to my little holder. And now for some more details that won't really be seen. I wanted to make fireplace accessories, you know, the shovel, the brush, the holder. I use a bamboo stick and some balsa wood for the holder. I just drill a hole into the base and into the top where I want them to connect. I then made these handles using jute rope. I'll show you how I made those. Using PVA glue, I just simply douse it on my jute rope and then turn it into a nice little loop, wrap it round and then let it dry. When it's dry, I can stick the handles on, and right now we're going to make a nice little shovel. So again, adding some super glue and balsa wood is what I use to make the base of this shovel. I just carved it up a little bit, nothing too major. As I said, this won't really be seen, but I needed to add the details. So I connect my base of the shovel onto my stick, and there we have it. And now this can just hook onto the holder. Ta-da! There's nothing fancy for the poker, it's just a toothpick and connecting the handle. And for the brush, I connect the handle and also add some double-sided tape to the bottom of this to connect the brush bristles. So what we do is add some jute rope to the double-sided tape, and then we start to wrap it round as we peel off the other side of the tape just to layer this up. So just slowly peel it off and then wrap it around the bottom of the toothpick. I add another piece of yarn for the trimming to neaten it up a bit, and then I just chop it down to size, or snip it, shall we say. With all my accessories complete, I'm going to go ahead and paint these black to match the rest of the accessories in our little rustic modern home. Now it's time to decorate the tree and add all of the finishing touches to this diorama. I had these lights, but I felt they didn't quite work for the tree, but I'm going to use them later on. I'm going to add all of my nice little trinkets, some beads and mini tinsels and acorn, but I do want to make my own star and some candy cane and make a wreath for the fireplace, and I'm going to just add some little beads around this using some metallic paint that my hubby got me. Really, really nice paint. I'm going to add these to some of the little balls that I've got and then stick those onto the wreath along with some acorns and glitter. To make my candy cane, I use some red and white yarn and absolutely smother it with PVA and water mixture to get that nice and sticky. I also add another bit of yarn to this to make my star. This is like a macrame type of yarn, and I'm going to use that as well. I totally cover this string in the glue and then set that aside while I make my candy cane. I cut my red and white yarn into tiny little strips, completely covered with glue, and then add these to some mini little clamps. I'm going to twist the tops and bottoms and then clamp them together. So what you want to do is have one side clamped, then we're going to twist it and then add the clamp to the other side when we've got the desired shape. Then just leave those to set and dry. While that dries, we're going to make our star. So now, taking a foam mat, I draw a star on a tiny little piece of paper and then add some sellotape over it or some cling film, whatever you have. Then I use some pins to follow the point of the star and just stick that all the way around like this. Then using the gluey string we made earlier, we're going to wrap this around the pins, trying to follow a star pattern the best we can. Now, this is an interesting project that I would love to try again. I might try it on full scale just to get more of a handle, because this was really tiny, but you want to keep following the pins around so that you end up with a nice little star shape at the end of it. Then leave it to set and dry. Now with that drying, we can unclamp our candy cane and it is set and ready to go in the tree, and they turned out super cute. Now I'm going to just add them to the tree. Perfect. It's time for the big reveal. We can unpin the star and get that on top of the tree as well. So we just take out all of the pins really carefully. Be careful you don't prick yourself as well. And there we have our little star. Let's pop this on the tree. Yay! Our homemade star from scratch. It's finally time for me to finish the lighting, and I got myself a soldering iron, which I haven't used since I was a wee child. In school was the last time I remember using one of these, and I was terrible then, but I know I'm going to need it for future projects. So I take my matching wires, my plus and my minus, and make sure that everything is connected together. So we have the ceiling light and the two wall lights. I make sure that my black is my minus wires, so I soldered these together, and then I did the same with the yellow and white wires again. It was so much fun trying to do this, because it's been so long since I've done anything like this. Felt like a real electrician, you know, just working with wires and soldering, and it's really cool. And there's one thing about being a miniaturist, guys, that you are the master of everything. I've become a carpenter, a solder, a crafter, a builder, an architect. It's like everything rolled into one, and I absolutely love it. So eventually I get all of this soldered and put together, and then I use some black electrical tape just to stick any loose wires down and also cover the wires that are exposed with my soldering. I believe that keeps it more secure, and this back will be sealed, but I want to make sure that I don't have any wires hanging out or anything, so I seal this and make sure it's really nice and protected at the back. Once I'm happy that this is nice and secure, I add some grey craft board to the back, and I'm going to seal that down, making sure that you still have access to the lights at the bottom if you do want to change the batteries, or obviously to switch it off and on as well. So now I just clench my butt cheeks together and hope that the lights work, because I've already sealed it in, but here we go. Work. Yes! My first working lights. I'm so happy. And my chandelier light works too. This is so perfect. And now we're on our home stretch, guys. It's time to add the framing to our room box. I'm going to just use some grey craftboard strips and paint them with my burnt umber and lamp black, and using the technique that I used earlier, just wiping it off so that we have that nice wooden tone so it matches the rest of the room. I'm going to let these dry, then stick them on at the very end. Now it's time to furnish our room with all of the handmade goods that we made completely from scratch, starting with our prompt, which was the rug, and we know it was destroyed by Santa. Naughty guy. Now it's time to fill the shelves with all of the decor that we have made. Some of this won't be seen at the end, but I still, for realism, like my shelves to be full. So let's get on with it. So here's the basket with all of our wood sticks. I also made some cushions. These printables are available in my Etsy store as well. This is just a nice little shelf filler. You know, have some little cushions by the fireplace and just choose when you want to mix and match. I've got our bottle of wines, our little planter, and a little holder just popped on there as well. Here is our home decor books. A nice little wreath by the window, but I still can't decide which one, so we'll come back to it. Here's our nice little jug that we made from the clay earlier, and also our little decorative rock that we've made. Not to mention our Martina Cole Thriller book selection. And other thriller novels. You can't have enough of these cozy by the fire. I'm going to leave a space here because this is where our lovely tree will go. I swapped the wreath that was on this wall for some antlers. I felt like it looked better there, and I put this over by the window. Now I found its home. We can add the remaining wine bottles to the table and put that in place. Ah, perfect. I won't be sticking the table down in case you want to remove it or put it back. I still like things to move around. I had a wreath on top of the fireplace, but I decided to move it because the chandelier was too long and you couldn't really see it properly. Nice little picture will do. There. Now the absolute final touches is adding the trimmings that we made earlier. I stick them the top, the bottom and the sides. Ah, it's nearly complete, but I feel like we need a little bit more festivity. So I add the lights that we had earlier to the outside of the room blocks, and this just brings it all together. And now I can complete the rest of my prompt and fill it in with my before and after pictures. I am so happy with how this turned out. I learned so much during this project and I can't wait to do the next prompt. And now with everything in place, it's time for the final reveal. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video and this process and you got some value out of it. Now let's take a look at our Christmas Eve tour. Like, share, subscribe.